Hey guys, how you going? My name is Dom, and in this video we're going to be exploring BEM, which is short for Block Element Modifier. Okay, so this right here is a CSS naming convention. So it is not something that you install, it's not a package or a library. It's simply just a way you can name your CSS classes. And the reason why you might want to use it is because it allows you to have consistent, well-formed class names that are easy to develop with and also maintain. And I use this for basically all of my projects from now on. I find it essential to have some sort of system or naming system for your classes, okay? And it's actually very simple to start using. And I think that anyone at any level can start using BEM on their web projects, okay? So it is not as hard as the name kind of suggests, okay? So in this video, we're going to be covering all of BEM, most of BEM, to get you started. And I think basically from this video, you can get a really good understanding of, obviously how it works and how you can start using it. Okay, so let's take, for example, this right here. We have two users on this page, and we're going to start from scratch from here and use BEM to, of course, develop into this right here. So let's begin by first taking a look at the actual BEM name. So we have here block, element, and modifier. So those three words represent each individual part of BEM. So let's begin with block. Okay, so block basically represents a single contained block or component on the page. All right, so for example, here we have two user blocks. Each one of these is a user block. Okay, so it's contained, it's by itself, and it means one whole structure or one whole component, and that is a block in BEM. Okay, we then have element. So element is an element or a part of a block. So here we have a profile photo element and also a user name element. Okay, so the reason why they're elements is because they depend on the block to work properly. It wouldn't make sense for you to have the user photo image outside of the user block, because of course the profile photo is about the user. Okay, and this is in comparison to a block, for example. So here we have the button, or a view profile button. This is actually a block. The reason for that is because a button can be used outside of the user block. It does not depend on the user block, and it does make sense to use a button outside of the user block. So of course it is a block, not an element. And that is the main difference there between a block and an element in BEM. The element depends on the block and only makes sense within its block, whereas the blocks, of course, like this button, do make sense inside a block and also by itself. Okay, so we have block and element, and they're the two main parts of BEM. We then have modifiers. So modifiers are basically, as the name suggests, they're ways for you to modify the behavior or the appearance of a block or an element. Okay, so in this case right here, we have a modifier on the user, and this is a modifier for a dark theme. So of course here I've added the dark modifier on the user card or the user, and it is made it black with white text. So we're going to cover all of this stuff in this video to, of course, go from this to this. Alright, so let's go inside the blank bare bones HTML file and go inside the text editor. We have this right here. So I've just included my dcode CSS file. This just contains some of my own custom fonts and colors for dcode. It should not matter for the purpose of this video, so just ignore that. Aside from that, everything else is pretty plain and from scratch. So let's begin by representing in HTML the user block. Okay, so let's make a new div with a class of user right here. And that's all you need to create a user block with BEM. Okay, so the basic syntax is, for your blocks, you simply write the name of your block as the element or the HTML element class. Okay, simple as that. So now for the elements, we have two elements. We have the profile photo and we also have the user or the user's name. So down here, we can make a new image and give it a class of user, then double underscore, and then photo. So this right here is the style or the convention for elements in BEM. You start with the block that it's contained within, then two underscores, and then the element name, just like that. Okay, so again, pretty straightforward. I'm going to add the source here to be images/user.png, and of course the alternate text, we can just say user right there. Cool, so now we can move on to the name element. So down here we can say div with a class of user__name. Inside here we can say Jeffrey. So very similar to above, just with a div instead of an image. So now move on to the button block. So down here we can have a button with a class of button. Simple as that. We have the button block down here. Okay. Inside here we can say view profile. So once again, just to recap, the reason why this is a block and not an element is because buttons make sense to appear outside of this user. Therefore, it is a block and not an element. All right. So I can save this and refresh the browser, and we have this result right here. Let's add some CSS to make it look a bit nicer, something like this. Okay, so back inside here, let's head over to the CSS and begin by working on the user block/class. So we can say user, give it a width of 135, some padding of 15 px, a box sizing of border box, a border of 1 px solid and a light grey. Let's float them to the left so they're side by side, and also a margin right of 20, or let's just say 10 px. Okay, I'll just collapse this or fold that up, and we can then target the user photo class. In this case, it's a BEM element, so user photo. Give it a width of 100%, take up all of that horizontal space. Let's make it display as a block. This, of course, is separate to a BEM block, but basically the reason for this is so that we don't get. I believe there is like a 1 pixel margin on the bottom of images that are displayed as their default. So just display block for a bit of consistency. We can say border radius of 50%, a box shadow that is inset at 0, 2px, 2px, and a 35% opaque black. Okay. We can now add some styles for the username. We can say user_name, give it a font weight of bold, a text align of center, a font size of 0.9 rem, and some padding. That'll be 10px and 0. Okay, so now we can then moved on. We've done all of the user stuff. We can now work on the button block. Okay, we can simply just say width of 100%. Let's give it a color or text color of a dark gray, a light gray background, and a padding of 7px and then 12px. A border of none, same goes for the outline, and a border radius of 2 pixels, and cursor as being pointer. Alrighty, let's just close this down and also add the active pseudo class to ensure that the user gets to see what happens when they press down on the buttons. We can say button active. Let's give it a box shadow of inset 004px and then a 40% opaque black. So now we've defined all of the main styles for the user block, its elements, and also the button block. So you may have noticed that I'm simply adding the class of the elements without the parent behind it. So for example, I'm not saying .user and then .user_photo. I'm not doing this. I'm simply writing the name of the element. And that is the way you do it in BEM. Okay? Just keep that in mind. That just reduces, how much certain elements depend on each other. Of course, in the case of elements, it may not be too bad if you do this, because after all, this element depends on this one. But just to be safe and to follow the correct practices with BEM, ensure that you keep all of your CSS class names separate without any sort of parent-child selectors. Okay, so we have all of this CSS defined. I can save this and refresh the browser, and we have this result right here. Okay, so basically most of our CSS is all done. So we have this result. You may notice that the button itself is not blue, so I've used the gray button here, and that's because in this case I'm making this button to have a gray background by default. So a base button on my page looks like this. In this example, I'm using a blue button, and this right here is due to a modifier on the button to make it blue. So essentially, this is what I call a primary modifier. So I'm adding, on this page here, I'm adding a modifier called primary on this button to make it blue. So it's a primary button. So let's go ahead inside here and add that modifier to the button. We've explored block and element. Let's move on to the modifier. So inside here, let's go down to the button and add a modifier. This can be done by keeping the current name of your button, class name. So keep the base class name or the block class name, and put a space and say button, then -- primary. So the syntax or the convention for this is going to be double dash in BEM represents a modifier, so button primary and also button. And that's how you specify a modifier in BEM. So up here I can say .button -- primary. Once again, I'm not saying, I'm not doing button then button primary. I'm simply saying button primary. Okay? Inside here we can add a different color for the text and the background. So we can say background, make it a nice light blue, so 2388E1, and a text color of white. So I can save this and refresh, and we have this right here. Perfect, right? So that is how you do a modifier. Now the reason why your modifier is added to the end of your block in the class section is because, of course, you want to retain all of the previous values or CSS rules that you put on the button. So for example, if I get rid of the button class from here, save this and refresh, we have this right here. Okay, so obviously we want to keep the button styles and modify it slightly, a bit of a touch up on the button to ensure, of course, it's a primary button and not a base button. Okay, so back here, let's put this button class back where it was. Now the main advantage of this is because if you want to have, let's just say you want to have an error button or like a delete button, you could do this. You can add two buttons here. For example, you can say delete and say button -- warning, for example. Then up here, you copy and paste this and say button -- warning, change the background color to be a nice red instead. So let me just see if I can get this working. Alright, make it a red instead of your blue. I can save this and refresh, and now we get a warning button or red warning button and also a primary button. So that's how it's sort of, you can of course swap out different modifiers to make everything consistent, and everything just works really nicely when you're developing with this style. Okay, so that is how you can modify a block with BEM. So what about modifying blocks, but also blocks with elements inside of those? So of course here we have the dark theme, And the difference between this modifier and the button modifier is that this one also modifies the child elements inside the block. So for example, my text color is white down here. And also, I've got a different shadow on the profile photo. So I'm modifying the elements inside the block with my dark block modifier. Alright, so let's see that in action. So let's go back inside here and just remove that warning stuff. That was just for an example. Okay, and head back up to the top here. Let's actually just make a new copy of this user, just like the previous example. And now I'm going to add a modifier to the user block. I'm going to say user, then user dash dash dark theme. Alrighty, and let's go up here again and create the modifier class, or CSS rule set. So we can say user dash dash dark theme. Let's begin with the basics, and that would be to have the background as being a very dark gray. Alrighty, let's save this and refresh. Of course, we get this result right here for the second one, which is obviously really good. But to modify the photo and also the text, this can be done by going down here, and we can say user dash dash dark theme, and then we can say dot user photo. So I know I said, of course, you don't want to do this sort of thing, but this is this is allowed by BEM to be able to do this for modifiers. Okay, so when I say you're not allowed to and all this sort of thing, you can of course do it, but it's more about how much you stick to the convention. In this case, the convention on the website allows you to do this. So, of course, since your elements depend on the block, it does make logical sense to have this this modifier also apply to the photo. So I can say box shadow here and say inset 0, 2px, 2px, and a light box shadow. So 35% opaque white. And the same goes for the username text. So go down here, copy this and say user underscore name and change the color to be white. So I can save this and refresh, and we have this result right here, just like this previous example right here. Okay, so that is how you can use BEM. So one more thing, when you're using BEM, you want to try and avoid making a sort of hierarchy, or you want to try and avoid sort of representing your HTML DOM hierarchy in your CSS. So by this I mean, if you have sort of if you have in this username, for example, right? Let's try and use this. If you have username, right? So then you might have inside here, this will be your username text, okay? And then you may even have something like an icon. So let's just say you have like a user head icon. So you might have an icon tag with a class of whatever icon library you use, and then you say icon dash dash user, and that will be your little user head icon on your page, right? So here you have these two separate parts of your username element. So in this case, you don't want to start doing things like this. You don't want to start doing span class user underscore name and then underscore text. This right here is not permitted or not advised by BEM. This sort of starts to get messy, and it's sort of like you're using your username as a block and then your text as an element. It's not too good. So here you're sort of representing your hierarchy, so your 1, 2, 3 inside your class name. It's not good. Instead, you want to have something like this: user underscore text. Okay, so that is cleaner and that is advised by BEM. And of course, same goes for the icon. You don't want to say user underscore name underscore icon. You just want to have something like user underscore icon. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Try not to overcomplicate your class names. Try not to make it so it sort of follows a hierarchy of your structure here. Just keep them simple and keep them modular and separate. Alright, and that right there is the overview of how to use BEM for your web projects. Alright, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.